Saying patient centricity is great as a tagline, if you will, but what does it exactly mean? Whatever the role is, we're being very clear. Is it getting more patients on your therapies? That's an admirable goal, but even if that's the case, for what purpose, right? What does that prevent? What does that do to the healthcare system overall? Are you taking a burden off of other elements of the healthcare system? We've seen areas where, as you probably read, obesity treatment is becoming so prevalent that it's impacting some of the ultra-processed food companies, right? And some of the other areas. So those are macro shifts. And the end result of that is people are healthier, right?
New choices, new players, new models of care. Consumer first healthcare is everywhere. For us to build the future, to see what's new, we gotta look at the world from a different point of view. Consumer innovation ain't going away. I say it's here to stay. Today it leads the way. We gotta drop the silos. We're all the same team. Experience, business, tech, and marketing. So join us now. Join the revolution. Consumer first health is the evolution. Status quo or like status no. Yeah, this is the healthcare rap. Yo, come on, let's go.
Welcome back to the leading podcast about consumer-centered healthcare. What if healthcare was actually centered around what consumers need and expect? We're talking with leaders who are making it happen one experience at a time. I'm Jared Johnson, and this is episode 422. Today, we have the Flava of the week about employee wellness trends. What does WellHub's latest report tell us from millions of global well-being data points? And where do employee wellness and digital fitness collide? I'll talk about that. Then I share a profile in healthcare leadership as I welcome David Kamenir, Vice President of U.S. Enterprise Strategy for Novo Nordisk. David reflects on lessons in leadership, strategy, and the accelerated pace of change, and he shares how he's learned to understand and even predict consumerization trends during more than 2 decades as a pharma leader. It's time for the awesomeness, y'all. Are you ready? Let's go.
Flava of the week.
The employee wellness landscape is dynamic and ever evolving, and we can use this information to better understand what matters as consumers pursue better health. That's according to WellHub's latest report that dives into exclusive employee wellness data and predictions. The report offers insights into how employees prioritized their well-being in 2024 and which trends they plan to continue seeing. Their data was based on an analysis of hundreds of millions of check-ins from millions of WellHub subscribers. A check-in in this report is any time someone used a service within the WellHub network, whether it's a visit to the gym or time spent on a meditation app. I personally wasn't as familiar with WellHub until I came across this report, so I found it interesting that they provide comprehensive access to a wide range of options across multiple wellness categories, including fitness, nutrition, sleep, mindfulness, therapy, and healthy habits. Here are the trends that they found. Strength training remains the most popular workout genre globally, followed by Pilates and combat sports. Yoga was the fastest growing workout genre with a 7% increase in check-ins. Nutrition led the substantial growth in digital wellness categories with a 112% increase in usage, followed by healthy habits at 72%. Employees who used both digital and in-person wellness options checked in twice as often, an average of 18 check-ins a month, as compared to those who used in-person or digital only. Government and public sector employees were the most active WellHub users in 2024. Wellness Hour is the new happy hour. Tuesdays at 6 o'clock p.m. local time is the peak time for well-being activities across the globe. And Sunday was the most popular day for users to take a break from their wellness routines with the fewest check-ins across most countries. They also shared 3 predictions for what's next in global employee wellness. First, healthcare will take the lead. They point to organizations like Northwell Health and LifePoint Health stepping up their employee wellness game, and they expect this to continue as the industry prioritizes programs to combat the burnout crisis and improve employee wellness and health in 2025. Second, the home workout resurgence. With the return to office policies in 2025, they expect at-home workouts to make a comeback. They saw digital fitness exploding with an app usage increase of 130% last year. And third, workout anytime, anywhere. As the lines between work and personal time become increasingly blurred, employees will find ways to fit wellness into their busy schedules. They'll crave better work-life integration and begin using wellness breaks to be more productive and less stressed. It's a lot of interesting info, so what's the consumer lens here? The 2 things I found most interesting from the consumer point of view were that nutrition has the highest growth among digital wellness categories, and the point about employees checking checking in twice as often when they used both digital and in-person wellness options. Those 2 points on their own are enough to direct the ways that we design and market new services. Bottom line, always be conscious of ways that people are trying to improve their health, because most of the time they don't involve a doctor's appointment. Let's seek out more data about proactive health and wellness to better understand where healthcare services can benefit consumers. That's another way that we'll build the healthcare of tomorrow, and that's the Flava of the week. Shed is revolutionizing health and wellness by making wellness available to everyone. Through personalized nutrition, high-quality supplements, and science-backed wellness strategies, Shed empowers individuals to take control of their health and live longer, healthier lives. Not sure where to start? Try NAD+, the ultimate coenzyme that supports cells, DNA repair, and anti-aging. Or maybe you'll like LDN for managing chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, and metabolic health challenges. Visit Try Shed to start your wellness journey today. That's tryshed.com.
The flow.
Hey everyone, let's get into the flow. Would you please join me in welcoming our guest this week? I'm here with David Kamenir. David is the VP of U.S. Enterprise Strategy for Novo Nordisk. David, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity, Jared.
It's a rare thing for us to have a guest on here with as much leadership experience in this field as yourself. So I just want to say we're honored to have you on the show. Well, what would you like our listeners to know about you?
Oh, well, I've been with Novo Nordisk for quite some time in a variety of roles. So I've had a chance. My whole family is entrepreneurs in many ways. They've got businesses in mechanical contracting, real estate development, et cetera. So I've worked there over the summers and growing up. So I've got more of an entrepreneurial bent, you could say, at least for corporate America, and have been able to apply that to this organization just because we've been it's in such a dynamic company that if you have that bent, there's a chance to kind of shape your career a bit. So that's what I've done here. I'm also a pretty good cook, but maybe that's a different episode.
That could be an ongoing segment. That sounds pretty fun. And anything you want to share there? Like any type of cooking that you prefer? Like what's the cuisine or the dish that's kind of at the top of that list?
I'm heavy on fish. So I've learned quite a few techniques about how to handle fish and salmon in different ways, and tempering it first and making sure you've got the right cooking methods. But they all come out differently depending on how you prepare. So quite a few tricks, at least I've learned about, and I've applied that in the home kitchen. So I'm the family cook. So that's something I do like. And I think by necessity, since I'm the only one here who can cook, that's where I've got that hat. But yeah, happy to share more about that with you or your audience as time allows.
Actually, I am interested, especially on the salmon side. It's one of our favorite family dishes here. You talked about a couple of different ways to do that. I mean, I'm usually sticking on the lemon pepper type of seasoning and it's kind of like pan seared type of thing. Is there something special? Like, what's your favorite way to do this?
Well, I do. You're right. So there are different ways to prepare it. You can certainly marinate it beforehand just for the right amount of time. But I do like to finish it in the oven or under the broiler or even in a pan sear, but often I do bake it. But I think you're getting it to the right temperature. There's a little bit of leeway with salmon because it's a fattier fish, so you get a chance to, right? You don't have to be as precise with the risk of overcooking it like you do with other fish, but it is a good one, and it is a staple here.
I'm hearing a recurring segment coming out of this, so I'm going to keep that in mind for sure. And it really actually does relate to this whole goal and one of our themes here, which we're talking about preventive and health and wellness. I'm like, nutrition's as big a part of that as anything. So, okay, cool.
Totally.
Love that. Let's dive into this a little bit because our opportunity here, I feel like, is to hear just from you with your point of view and your perspective, again, with the leadership roles you've had. And typically we can look back at a lot of stories of career journeys, and we can point to a handful of decisions that had big impacts on a career as well as big impacts on a business itself. So from your perspective, do any decisions come to mind? Like when you're looking back at Novo Nordisk's shift, these aren't small shifts. There was a major shift to the obesity market, to the metabolic health market. And now you see this incredible market dominance right now. Are there any particular decisions that come to mind when you say like these things kind of impacted that shift or kind of led to it, or you could kind of tell like the shift was going to happen? I'm just curious, you're looking back at that journey and like, wow, those are some of the things that contributed to that, to where Novo Nordisk is today.
So for those who maybe don't know a lot about Novo Nordisk, I mean, the organization has been around for over 100 years. and actually commercialized the production of insulin after extracting it and purifying it. And that technique was brought to Denmark from Canada by August Crow, who did it for his wife, who was a medical doctor living with diabetes. So it's got an interesting backstory that certainly people can look into. But with insulin and the advent of that, diabetes was no longer a death sentence, right? And life expectancy improved pretty dramatically. So that's a huge part of our history, right? Over 100 years. If you fast forward to, say, 2017, we were coming off of in the US, a 47 straight double-digit growth period, and then it flattened, at least our growth contribution from the US. And we saw some concerning trends in the market, in the macro healthcare environment, and we began to have some pretty challenging discussions around our core value proposition, especially as that growth flattened in the US. So it was a bit of a wake-up call, you could say, that we had to drive trade-offs and focus in on what are the must-win battles that we need to really hone in on versus trying to do equally well at everything. So you can make a case that the 100-year-old history, we've had some significant success and pride, but we did see a need to shift our commercial focus a bit more heavily or a lot more heavily toward GLP-1s to set the stage for these next generation therapies that you see on the market today. So GLP-1s have been in development for quite some time. We had some precursors to the products you see out there today, but this was a chance to really make a bold shift in terms of our commercial focus, right? So you could say the interest in GLP-1s wasn't just about chasing a market opportunity. It was about recognizing the potential to fundamentally change patient outcomes. And you alluded to that a little bit in the beginning with sort of nutrition and healthcare and healthy living and how all of those things play into it. But obesity is very, very complex, and it's a very complex disease, but it is a gateway disease in many ways. And the idea of it being responsible for up to 200 conditions, right, and comorbid conditions is very significant. So if you can get it early, which is where, even though the market wasn't developed yet when we put the strategic shift into place, if you can get it early, we believed we'd be able to transform the way obesity is cared for. And my role has always been about, at least in the last 6 years I've had this role, anticipating about where the macro environment, the industry is headed, and making the strategic choices that position us to lead.
Amazing. Because this isn't a view that we have a lot of visibility into a lot. So appreciate you sharing that. I know from a personal standpoint, I'm looking at the opportunities you've had and the roles you've had here. I was reading back in October, you were listed in this group, the 2024 Pharma Voice 100. So it was a group of recognized leaders. So I just want to say congrats first and foremost that you were listed among this group, the Pharma Voice 100 this last year. In the article associated with that, you were quoted as saying something I thought was really interesting. You said, and quote, "We're at the beginning of a new era with high focus on disease modifying or curative treatments versus symptomatic care." I wonder if you can kind of dive into what you meant by that, and do you still feel the same way today?
I do. I mean, it's certainly not a straight line to get there, but there's definitely a potential to move beyond treating symptoms and start addressing some of these root causes. And we've seen that already in pockets. There's certain therapies that come out and they're curative, right? We've seen that in Hep C, we've seen that in certain eye diseases, et cetera. So there's fits and starts with, I think, anything emerging, whether it's genome related, cell and gene therapy. And I think that's going to continue, but I do think we're on the cusp of a new frontier, if you will. So there's pockets of transformational care already out there and coming out, but there's also a lot of emerging signals in the lab, right? And certain things that, whether using vaccines to treat cancer, et cetera, or different ways to grow cartilage and different ways to replenish beta cells in the pancreas, right? So all of these that have had some lengthy runs, some more than others, the science is advancing to a place when you look at the long arc of history to where I do think we're on the cusp of a different frontier for how medicine is cared for, and particularly in terms of preventative medicine, which hasn't been a historic strength in the U.S., but something that with the right science and the right focus and funding, which is a challenge in the current environment, we can make some good progress there in changing the health of largely unhealthy population, or at least too big a percentage of the population that's unhealthy. And it doesn't need to be that way. And there's a lot of factors for that, but getting ahead of some of these things early and having really transformative, innovative treatments and therapies is huge. And we're seeing a lot more signs of that emerging from quite a few different areas.
All right, so there's a correlating quote there in that same passage that I wonder if I can share with you too and get your comment on.
Sure.
So you're also quoted as saying, the healthcare ecosystem is transforming at an accelerated rate with therapeutic innovation, consumerization of care, and tech-enabled personalization of care, all while facing mounting financial pressure and healthcare provider shortages. That was just a great, concise summary of what's happening right now in medicine and related fields, life sciences in general. So how are you able to do some of the things you just talked about there? Like, how are you able to predict and understand and translate consumerization trends and some of the other things you were describing there?
Well, it does illustrate that it's not easy, right? Because on the one hand, you've got these emerging trends, some of which are just accelerating, some are new. But you also have some pretty big tailwinds, or I should say headwinds, challenging some of the opportunities within those trends. So it's a very complex ecosystem, and change, the rate of change, not just change itself, but the rate of change has been accelerating in recent years, right? So I think that's where looking at how challenging the healthcare system is in the U.S., there are a lot of stakeholders. There are both established and some of these emerging intermediaries. The economics of care, like you mentioned, are getting more difficult. And all the while, we're facing what I believe is a very significant trend, and challenge, which is a mounting healthcare provider shortage. There already was a shortage of doctors and those who are providing care, but that shortage is increasing. And that's a big problem, right? The more people you have and the fewer doctors you have, it's a challenge. And you could tell these things are big trends when you feel them anecdotally. That's always what I believe is a good litmus test. So it's not just a statistic. I had a doctor appointment I was trying to make. I called earlier in the year for a specialist. This was January, and the first available was October, right? So that's a long time. That's 9 months or so. And when you think about that in other countries, sometimes it's years. So this is becoming a challenge more and more. So we see these challenges like many others do, and we work on a lot of these things. But our end goal is really to ensure that our therapies reach the patients who need them. And not losing sight of that mission, despite how complex the healthcare system gets or how challenging it is to bring new innovation to a receptive market. I mean, that's, I think, one of the most important things. So we do spend a lot of time imagining what success looks like across the board and then how we might get there. And when we think about, we take some of these scenarios, if you will, or these intensified, extrapolated future worlds and facilitate discussions about what success looks like. So it could be a case where we have these new entrants and consumerization or diversifying patient care beyond the traditional channels. We've seen that quite a bit with telehealth and the way that's taken off. There's a greater focus on personalized care, and that's enabled by AI, which is also taking off, and some of these other tech advances. So how do we operate to succeed in those scenarios? And we try to play the role, you could say, of the conductor in guiding leadership to the implications and decisions that we need to make to succeed under these futures. So in my role, it's really critical to translate some of this complex future and these trends into actionable strategies that keep patients at the center of everything we do. And it's not just a tagline. I mean, that's really important. We put patient centricity at the top of everything we do to focus the organization and to make sure that we're not losing sight of our mission.
One reason I really respect that is the term patient centricity on the provider side, on the sick care side, on the traditional hospital and health system and provider side. It is also talked about a lot. We talk about a lot on this show about how to actually make it happen, but it also looks different depending on the side of the industry, depending on even specialty of physician, depending on business structure around a provider-patient relationship and the social determinants surrounding it and the social drivers of health around the patient's capabilities. And so it means so many different things. And sometimes it's important to just take a step back and be like, there's that term we hear a lot. And so I loved just the context you're able to provide in it, because it does help us recognize at its core, we all do want that. We all want healthcare to be more personal, to solve the things that it should solve. So I think it's important to mention. I was glad you brought that up.
And there's no one that's working for our organization or any of these physicians, employees, we're patients too, right? And so I think making it, not losing sight of that, it's not a corporation, which it is an organization that's designed. We're actually majority owned by a foundation, so it gives us a little more leeway to have a longer view. But at its critical core, the goal is to improve the lives of patients. That's why we're in this business. That's why we started. I gave that story in the beginning about our history and the way we originated. But I think it's really, really important to keep that front and center focus. And I've been in this organization a long time, so it's hard to speak to others, but I know that that's a core element and core tenet of how we operate. So it is important.
Agreed. From a personal standpoint, if you could share a message with industry leaders to that point, there are a lot of people who do care, who want to make healthcare more consumer centered. They want to make the way that we experience our health, our wellness, any portion of that journey, the way that we experience that. There are a lot of people in the industry who do want that to be an easier process, more personal, addressing our needs, addressing the things we expect along the way. So if you could share a message with industry leaders, because they're embattled every day, as yourself included, you're embattled, right? You're getting asked to do a lot of different things, getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So if you could share a message with your peers there as industry leaders about, hey, we know you're trying to do this, like this mission keeps going. Like, what message would you share with them?
It's at least two things. One, being very clear about what you're solving for. So saying patient centricity is great as a tagline, if you will, but what does it exactly mean? Are you trying to improve outcomes for certain subsets of patients? And if so, to what degree? Are you trying to prevent downstream conditions? Whatever the role is, we're being very clear. Is it getting more patients on your therapies? That's an admirable goal. But even if that's the case, for what purpose, right? What does that prevent? What does that do to the healthcare system overall? Are you taking a burden off of other elements of the healthcare system? We've seen areas where, as you probably read, obesity treatment is becoming so prevalent that it's impacting some of the ultra-processed food companies, right? And some of the other areas. So those are macro shifts. But what are we, and the end result of that is people are healthier, right? Or they're consuming less of the unhealthy processed foods. So I think being very clear about what we're trying to solve for there. The second one is about, I think, translating that message in a consumer-friendly way. If you have a 32% risk reduction for a certain comorbid condition, that resonates with the healthcare provider, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with the end consumer or the person living with that condition. So being able to translate those endpoints, those clinical endpoints, into what does it mean for the patient? Is it more movement? Is it more freedom? Is it something else that has a bit more of a emotional pull or a bit more of an impact at the consumer level? Being clear about that, I think, is super helpful.
The part you just mentioned about how that is a journey and there's a lot to it. We are seeing the macro shifts you were just talking about. That can cause people to just kind of feel stuck, I guess. Like there's an easy reason for people to feel like, oh, are the things that I'm doing helping? Like, are they contributing to the mission of our organization? It's something that's so unique about healthcare, life sciences, about this whole sector, is that you have a majority of people who do care, who do want to see people's lives improve. To your point of what patient centricity means, is that what we're aiming for? Is that improving lives? You know, my experience is that most people in the industry do care. They do want to see that. And it can be easy just from day to day to maybe not see that as clearly, or just wonder, hey, how are my efforts helping? And then the other aspect you brought into this is we are all patients, which is so true. Ourselves, our family members, those we care for, those who are parents, our children, we're all able to see healthcare in a unique way because we're all experiencing it at the same time as we're working in it. So there's just a lot of factors here. I'm curious what gives you hope for the future of healthcare, given that dynamic, given where the industry is today.
One, we talked about it a bit. I do think we're on the precipice of more curative transformational care, a bit more of an inflection point with disease modifying versus maybe mechanically fixing or addressing symptoms. So I don't know if you've ever seen what a knee replacement looks like on a video, but it's not pretty. It's very mechanical and archaic looking. So there's if you can leverage other therapies, if you can, in a case where it's a concern over, let's say, meniscus loss before that becomes an osteoarthritis risk, they're looking at ways to regrow that to the right level where it doesn't overgrow, but regenerate those. And I know we're potentially a far way away. Whatever's in the lab, there's a lot of roadblocks before it gets to science. But just the fact that we're studying those things and they're getting closer is super important. And I think being able to have much more elegant and transformational solutions, to me, that's exciting. That's where, whether I work for healthcare or not, I've always been interested in that, even growing up. So I think that's one big piece. The other is a increasing maybe commitment to prevention. We're seeing that in obesity, of course, as a gateway disease, or even in diabetes, but being able to attack these problems early on and prevent some of these significant downstream problems. It's very hard once some of these problems take hold and take root. But if you can attack them at the early end, you can prevent it on an individual level, but also impact population health while addressing some of the challenges that we talked about earlier in the healthcare system. So there's a piece of that I think is also important, which is access. The best medicines in the world have 0% efficacy for patients who can't get them. So ensuring that the access is there for those who are able to, who have these challenges or have the opportunity, we have the opportunity to prevent some of these challenges through broader access. So I think that's also, we're seeing more of that, whether it's through telehealth or just many different organizations leading to broader access for therapies and medicines. That's hopeful, right? Because then you start impacting things on a broader level and a broader scale. So I think there's the access piece, which is sort of the breadth of treatment and therapies to the population, and then sort of the high value of these next generation and the innovations in science that are being made across the board that are really going to transform, and already are starting to, certain diseases and hopefully many others.
You're painting a picture that is hopeful for all of us, I feel like. So it's great to focus on those areas.
I mean, there's a lot of things that look promising in the early stage or in research, and you see these headlines even in the news all the time, and then you read into it, it's like, oh, it's in mice models or it's phase one, and it's just a long road. I mean, it just takes so long. But again, with AI, which is also helping in not only speeding clinical trials, but in identifying compounds that could be very beneficial, right? It could have some efficacy. There's a lot of ways in which this whole route of identifying things that have a dramatic impact on these tough to treat conditions, that is accelerating. The rate of discovery is accelerating. So to me, that's just super exciting.
David, one last question for you as we wrap up here. If you could recommend a guest for us, like for a future episode on the show, who would that be?
One I might have to give some thought to. Depends on the topics and what you want to look at. But I mean, there's plenty of folks who can speak well about the overall healthcare, the trends that are happening, or specifically some of the new therapies that are emerging. If you're talking about from a kind of healthcare practitioner perspective and the way in which care is transforming.
The interesting thing is, like, even just topic wise, it's interesting to hear what immediately comes to people's minds of like, yeah, I want to hear more about that. So probably other people want to hear more about that too. And I think you're right. A lot of the things you just mentioned, everything from like regenerative therapies to some of the emerging therapies and solutions here, addressing obesity, addressing diabetes, addressing core aspects of health and wellness.
Yeah, I would love to, if I were listening to this as a listener on the next go around, I would love to hear those who know a lot more than I do talk about some of these transformative disease modifying therapies. I think even if it's within a certain subsector or broader across a few different therapy areas, the way in which, certain, like again, vaccines or even mRNA and the way in which that can be applied to a lot of different platforms. There's quite a few platforms that have potential for a lot of diseases. I'd love to hear about that. And I think it's important to get a perspective or provide your audience with a perspective on how the healthcare system is changing, because it is pretty dramatic. A lot of people don't know these trends until they feel them, right? Until you can't get an appointment with a doctor. Why is that? Or you have an appointment with a physician assistant, which may be great, but that might not have been where you were. Even that could be months to wait for, right? Or there's hyper-specialization where you're not even sure where to go. Healthcare gets really, really challenging, particularly in the US, because it's so fragmented when you have a problem, and a problem that's not easily diagnosable. And I can tell you from experience, there's a lot of frustrated people who don't know how to navigate through the healthcare system as a patient. So insight into that for your audience, I would listen for sure.
I'm right there with you. I'm literally just taking some notes. That could be a whole series on itself of answering some of those basic questions. Why does it take so long to get an appointment with my specialist? How does this work? Billing, there's a lot of areas there. So that we may see that come to fruition. We may be able to pull a series together for all of that. But I want to thank you so much for your time today, David, and let our listeners know how much we appreciate being able to hear from you, hear your perspective, and wish you the best in everything you have going on. Thanks for doing everything that you are doing to make healthcare more consumer-centered.
Thank you. Thanks, Jared. I appreciate the platform and the chance to chat for a few minutes.